What we're looking at here is some trials to evaluate some legumes that are typically used for multiple purposes, for forage, cover crop, for wildlife, and as well as really even for soil stability. We've got a number of species, and we have a couple different varieties within a species group. We also have two different plantings here. The ones at the back side were planted December 9th, so they're about 129, 130 days old. And the other ones that are in the front were planted the 1st of March. Right now it's April 16th, so that makes them about 46 days or so old. And we're in the southeast, so what we're really trying to represent here is a snapshot of how these might perform. First of all, going through winter in a mild winter climate, planted late, and second of all, what they might do in really a warm season environment, planted in the spring. Now, we'll go through and give a brief overview of each of the species and how what we're seeing with those, and then we'll look at the individuals by themselves. So starting on the left, this is a hairy vetch called Patagonia. Patagonia is known for fast growth, and what we have seen all along in the trials is we have seen that this variety gets out of the ground rapidly. It's a large seeded variety, and so even if we look at this particular one, and I'd say there's probably maybe a dozen plants in this, is that we're seeing that even within 45 days or so, this has got lots of growth. This is also when we look at the entire in the entire trial, that this particular plant has got probably the most vegetation on it. We're seeing it's at least 26 inches tall. No, I should take that back. Actually, if we're going to stretch out, we're probably closer to 29 inches tall. And really, one thing that we know is that it has nice biomass the whole way through. We've done some other evaluations where along the way we've looked at the root systems, and the root systems are exactly the same. The root systems are aggressive and fast. Nodulation happens quite fast. This particular species has multiple purposes. One of the purposes is that it can be used for animal feed and grazing or any kind of other situation where you can take that feed. Now it's highly nutritious. It's got lots of leafy material. Even the stems are soft. It's going to be a little bit hard to kind of cut in any kind of baling situation because it's quite viney. It does real nice when it can be supported by another crop. We've simulated another crop by putting some sticks here to help it stand up, but you can imagine that this would do well with something like a cereal rye or a triticale or something else. It plays well in the sandbox with other species because it will just work its way around. It doesn't really need a whole lot of base. You can see this is I think I've culled this down. I think this might be just one or two plants, and really we're down. I mean, that whole thing is coming from a really small base. Look at that base. So you can imagine that it would be very compatible with a lot of other plants in a mix, and they can be in a multi-species mix. The next to it is really this one is a favorite amongst people in the south and the north. It's crimson clover. Crimson clover, the traditional variety is a variety called Dixie clover, and again we see that it emerges fast. This is the spring planting, but really in our winter planting, this is one of the fastest emerging ones that we had, and Dixie is very much favored for any kind of forage production. It's soft all the way to the base. It can be grazed early. It can be seeded into existing pastures. can be seeded with things in a broadcast or drilled. And again, if you look at the base here, this base, you can imagine that if an animal grazed it or browsed it, there's lots of still solar panels. There's lots of ability for that plant to go through photosynthesis again and be regrazed. Its regrowth is excellent on this. We're, as mentioned, we're in the middle of April, starting to flower. Even as it's starting to flower, there's still lots of nice vegetative material. Now today it's above 85 degrees, and it's doing exactly what cool season plants do above 85 degrees. They're saying, hey, I'm going into protective mode. So you can see this is kind of wilting. It's protecting itself right now. This is a cool season plant, and it'll do very well. It plays out nice in all those environments we mentioned. We mentioned grazing, hay, ideal for both of those. Cover crop, it plays well. It's very shade tolerant. This one can be planted along, for instance, with something that has that's heavy in shade, because it has all these solar panels, and somehow it finds a way to get light and finds a way to grow, and is just a nice companion. Even if you look at these new plants here, you can imagine if you had other species in here, it would work well together. This is a super safe one. And again, if you look at for pollinators, you've got beautiful, attractive flowers, and for roadsides, you see this all across roadsides. You also see this with its root system that I'm not going to show you right now, but in some other videos you might see this root system. This one is going to go quite aggressively shallow initially, with a lot of root hairs right underneath the surface, and they're going to be able to grab a soil and hold and to retain that soil. Whereas the vetch, that root system, it's going to be focused on going down and then out. It'll have a fantastic deep root system, but the crimson doesn't even need to act. It's great for heavy clay soils because it may not penetrate it, but it's going to be able to grab and hold on to that top soil. Next to it, in the front row, we have Viper Balansa and medium red clover side by side. In the back, we have Viper Balansa and Bolta Balansa. So I'm going to deviate a bit just in these two, because we didn't plant medium red clover in the first trial. But what I want to note is that the medium red clover, if you look at this and you look compared to all of the other varieties and sets, the crimson clover, Viper, medium red, lightning Berseem, Balady Berseem, Marco Polo, and Vernal Alfalfa, what do you notice? You notice medium red, it is super happy being planted right now. Medium red is known to be one of the most ideal frost seeding clovers, and it's used up north for quite a while, and it is a perfect spring plant. And this demonstrates it. All it needs is a little bit of warm temperatures in spring, and it explodes. Medium red's a perennial clover. Oftentimes it's used in an annual environment just because of this. It's fantastic growth. We can't talk about what it looks like over winter because I didn't plan it on that. So we're just going to go ahead and just take this out for now, except I want to mention that medium red clover, its root system is a very, very focused taproot. This one is going to be ideal for droughty situations. It's going to be able to penetrate deep in a way that is going to be able to help it respond to when things get dry and hot. So we're going to go ahead and remove that for a minute. And we're going to talk about these Balansa clovers. Balansa clover is one of those that in some environments will not survive winter very well. In our environment, it survived winter just fine, and we had two different varieties. We had the Viper and the Bolta. In our spring trial, we just planted the Viper. Some people have found that their best success with Balansa is to only plant it in the spring, because this is after 45 days, and there's not a lot here as far as if you compare it, for instance, to the crimson clover or the Patagonia. And if you planted this by itself, or if you planted it in a mix, you're going to find that there's going to be other things that may want to compete for this space in the winter. But what's happening, whether it's in the winter or spring, is in that time frame, it is developing a lot right close to it. Now, there's my thumb. It's very small. I mean, this is like a 2.5-inch area here. There's a lot going on here, but it's slow. What's happening underground is significant. There's a lot going on underground, which is great. And where it can survive, it is a fantastic short-term clover, and I'll show you some of the reason why on that. So if you look at these two, this is Viper and Bolta. These Balansas, they come in different shapes and sizes, but they're quite similar for most of their initial growth. These, up until about 40 days ago, they all look the same. And if you look at the leaves look essentially the same. They're not any bigger. They have this serration on them. That's kind of a typical, that little sawtooth. That's a very typical way to tell the Balansa clover. But what we find that there is a maturity difference in some of the varieties. So this is Viper and this is Bolta. And Bolta, as you can see, this guy is now decided that he is going to get very tall and go to a flowering stage earlier than the Viper. So let's see if we can get an estimated height on here. This is now approximately, probably the tallest one might be 15 inches or so, whereas this maybe half of it, 8-9 inches. And if you also look closely, this is still there's still quite a bit of vegetative growth in here, although it started to flower. Whereas this you see, you've got much more growth related to the reproductive stage, where it's putting the stem out. The leaves down below, if you look at the canopy here compared to the canopy here, so there's a lot more vegetative leaves right here, less here. This is focused on reproduction now. Well, what's one of the good things about focused on reproduction? If you're interested in pollinators, that's why there's a bouquet. That's a beautiful bouquet for our pollinators. And one of the other things that this is going to do, by the way, just to give you an example, I can actually peel this away. I believe that this is a single plant here. And if you look down here, see all of that? See all of those? That started back when it was young. So right here, all of these, they grew, they started extending here, and they turned into this. That's what you get out of a Balansa clover, is you get a lot of growth all the way down to the base, and this is ideal for cover crops. These are soft. They can be crimped. If you look at these tubes, see you can pinch them. That's a great way to terminate this, is through a roller crimper, which is something that you could similarly use with a hairy vetch. That can be crimped as well. And whether it's a Bolta or a Viper, timing might help you decide your timing as to when you would need to harvest these for a cover crop. You might choose a different variety. If the focus is pollinators, then it really probably wouldn't make much of a difference. This root system is going to be as extensive underground as it is above ground, and we're going to hopefully take these out of the socks here and take a look at the root system and do some evaluation of those, and we're going to find that this is just going to be a mass of roots. Next to it are two other varieties of the same species. This species is Berseem. This one is called Lightning, and this is Balady, Balady 1. Berseem is an Egyptian clover, and it again is it's an annual clover. Everything that we've looked at besides the medium red is annual, and these show a significant difference that's beyond the maturity. Now, when we were back at the Balansas, we were looking at two plants that were pretty similar, except their maturity was just a little bit different, where one started flowering early. These have a different distinction that we want to reference as single cut versus multi-cut. Now, if you notice the Balady on the right here, these, even out of the get-go, they're starting off coming up almost like a tree. They're very upright. Their growth, you don't see much growth down near the soil level. The leaves, they're reaching for the sky already, and this is 46 days or so. If we compare that over to the lightning, there's probably just as many leaves, maybe even more, but they're closer to the ground. Look how close this one is to the ground. It's right at ground level. It's making its division right at ground level, whereas here, these guys are way up here. So when we go to the mature plants, these were planted again back in December. This guy is, he's, let me get the ruler, but he's probably 24 inches or so. And nope, he's about 21 inches. And then this one here is about 10, 11 inches or so. And you'd say, well, which one would you want? Well, it depends on your purpose. If your purpose is for fast, short-term, what we call single cut or single harvest or single use or sacrifice use, the Balady is going to win every day. One of the examples would be using Balady in the fall as a component of a mix where you want to attract wildlife. And this is going to come up probably faster than maybe anything else in the mix, and it will be what's called a sacrifice crop, because it'll come up, and if you want to, for instance, if you're trying to attract deer, the deer are going to see these little leaves, these tender leaves, and they're going to take those early. Maybe everything else is just too low, but these are going to stick up, and they're going to wave, and they're going to say, come eat me. As it grows up, if you're looking for a really short-term, fast cover crop or fast forage, maybe this is combined with some small grains or grasses or other things. This would play well in a mix. You can see it's not going to be competitive down below, and it's going to stand upright. It can be harvested nice and easy. Very, very easy to harvest. It can be harvested just as easy as an alfalfa or something else. It can be a companion even to alfalfa. And this guy's going to give you one single cut. What we call it single cut, single harvest is once it's harvested, it has very few points to regrow from, has very few solar panels down here, as compared to, for instance, the lightning. Look at that. I mean, if you cut that same height, you have just an abundance of other solar panels, other growing points for it to regrow. So when we evaluate things like this, we might test them where we do a single cut, and we might test them do a double cut. So in a single cut, this guy's going to win every time. He's going to win early. He's going to have a lot more biomass, but forage quality is definitely not going to be there. You can see it's already stemmy, and even out of the shoot, it's kind of stemmy. So this is going to, although it's and when I say stemmy, it's still a soft, hollow tube. That's the nice thing about these. They're still nice and tender, but it's obviously there's just going to be more lignin in that. Flowering time in this is not really, that's a huge deal. Okay, so this guy's flowering, but that's not really the issue. This guy's not flowering. It's late. It's starting to, but the real issue is the growth timing and whether you're going to need a multiple harvest or not. Clearly, this could go later in the season than this as well. If you're planting it in the spring, This guy's probably going to play out really, really quick. But this guy just may not, this may not be fast enough for you. So if I was, and especially down in the southeast, um, all of these may have minimal value because it's just gonna, today it's 85 and it's middle of April. It's not gonna get consistently any cooler than that. So I don't know if we've got 45 days or more that all these can have any value, but it's probably not more than that. And again, think about these guys. They're at 100 and what I say, I think 129 days of growth. Moving over to this variety and species, this is Marco Polo white clover, another perennial clover. And Marco Polo, this is planted in the spring, and this is planted in the winter. And I've got multiple plants in here. Here's an example of how an early plant will establish. If you notice, the growing point is way, way down there. See how low that growing point is? What's nice about that is that anything can come and whack that off. See, I just cut that. That's not going to die. That's going to regrow. So white clover, you think about white clover, you see white clover everywhere because white clover is really hard to kill. You can trample it, you can crush it, you can break those leaves, you can tear them off, you can mow them, they can be harvested, and it'll regrow. Also, if you notice, it doesn't take a whole lot of white clover. They're a tiny seed, and it doesn't take a whole lot to make a spreading plant. If we look back here, what do you see? It's just almost a mess of stems that are going to spread, and that's why white clover is often recommended for soil stability. It's recommended for weed control as long as you don't spray a selective herbicide for broadleafs. This is great weed control. This is ideal for any kind of forage. Look how that's tender, that's juicy. It can be harvested. Animal can graze that and it'll come right back up. It's not really the noted cover crop type species because it's a perennial. It's considered typically slower, although I'm finding it's kind of fast. But oftentimes with a cover crop, the desire is to be able to terminate it and it go away. There's not a guarantee that you're going to terminate this very easy and it go away. So best applications for this for wildlife, for permanent pastures, as well as for roadsides. And what we find in the root system here is we find that the roots are just like this. The roots are just they're not real strong, deep taproot, but they're very prolific, hair-like. So they do a great job at capturing and grabbing the soil and holding it and stabilizing it. Next to it's another perennial, and this one's not used in the southeast hardly at all, which is alfalfa. This is the traditional variety Vernal Alfalfa. It's an old variety. It's known for better winter hardiness. Here's some similarities that to white clover that you can see is that right at the base, that's where the growth is. Good growth right at the bottom. And that's also the same thing for the red clover. I'm going to bring the red clover back over so we can look at that because now these guys actually have more similarities than anything else. But if you look at the red clover, early on, again, you've got most of its growth right near the base. And these guys, when we look at their root structures, both of them have a good taproot. Both of them are great for drought hardiness. Early growth, not much so, right? And here's our growth from the winter, and it's okay, but it's definitely not an annual plant like the other ones. I mean, if you look at this growth from here and this growth from this one, and you go over and you look at the Balansa, or you look at the crimson or the vetch, you can understand why these guys are mostly used for early single season cover crop type use, and these guys get less attention. Is there a place for them? There very well might be a place, and some folks are looking at how maybe to use alfalfa and red clover for cover crops, even though they're perennial and even though they're going to be only used for 1 year. Let's just kind of pick around in here a little bit. What do you see? You just see vegetative growth over and over again, and alfalfa is called the queen of forage, and this is part of the reason why. This is ice cream to cows. This is just ideal forage. It's really hard to beat this. And so as we look back again over the whole, we can see that there are specific applications where many species will overlap, and then there are some applications that you really need to pick the best species, and then there are actually some applications where actually it's not just the best species, but you actually need to choose the best variety. And I think this is your most ideal example, is the lightning Berseem compared to the Balady Berseem. They've got different applications that they are most ideal in.